Hello and welcome back to CW Live. I'm John Chadfield, and this is a special episode focusing on tech workers and the UTAW branch, the United Tech and Allied Workers branch of the CWU. Before we get started today, I really want to pay a tribute from myself and the branch to Andy Kerr, our former Deputy General Secretary, Telecoms and Financial Services, who we sadly lost last week. Andy has had lots of tributes paid to him as a giant of the Labour movement. General Secretary Dave Ward and others have come out with really profound tributes to his life. I just wanted to pay a personal one and one from the branch, saying that he was a big supporter of tech workers organising. He was a big believer in that tech was an enormous sector and had a real future for collectivisation. And he really supported us getting started at the CWU. So it's a real heartfelt loss to the whole movement, and he had impact with us as well in the TechWorks branch, and we want to pay that tribute and mark our respects for Andy Kerr, a great loss. Moving on to industry news, we picked up a couple of pieces from the press that have made the headlines. Two of them we thought we'd talk about today because they're actually tech industry news really as well. One of them is Ticketmaster and dynamic pricing. So a lot of you who might have been interested in Oasis tickets will have experienced the joys of being in a queue for Ticketmaster. Now, from a technical perspective, I'm sure my members, the techies, could go into great detail about why a platform designed to sell tickets and queue people failed to deliver, not only for the fans looking for Oasis tickets, but for everyone else as well. The fragility of centralisation, all the ways to solve ticketing is a whole nother show maybe. But what I wanted to talk about and bring up, which hopefully has a broad interest for everyone, is Ticketmaster have essentially advertised this dynamic pricing, this surge pricing you might call it, increasing the price of tickets based on demand, and they've done it because they say it helps fend off the scalpers, right? Which anyone who knows who goes to concerts is a big problem for these kind of these ticket releases. But what actually they've done is they've just sort of interrupted the scalpers market and taken that profit. So you might think you're in a queue for a ticket for 150 quid, and then when you get to checkout, it's 350 quid, maybe more. And it's something we've seen, that it's a creeping thing we've seen in Uber. But it's also something that you're starting to see, like this sort of demand-led pricing and dripping into other things. And I think it's something we need to be vigilant, not just as tech workers, because we need to be part of the organising against it. Agitation of these big companies needs to come from within. But imagine if they start doing surge pricing for services you really need, like energy and stuff like that.
Don't they do that already?
I think there was a case in Texas in the States. I'll have to check this, but something happened in the States where an energy company was caught surge pricing around winter energy. And I think, we need to be live to that kind of stuff and nip it into the bud. Like Uber's obviously been called out on it, and Uber doing surge pricing around New Year's Eve seems to be quite accepted in London.
And crucially, I want to know that the Gallaghers are getting their money as well, because if they're expecting £100 a ticket and it's actually $350, they deserve that extra money.
The Gallaghers today, I think just today, have distanced themselves from the whole spectacle, saying that the surge pricing and the ticketing strategy was left to their partners in Ticketmaster, because obviously they've come at each other for the price. I think Liam came at Noel. He said, why are people paying 350 quid to see our kid in the States? And now that's them. Yeah. They're back there. So I think they've distanced themselves from it. It might be a case of we might not see this again and we'll see it revised, but it's definitely something to watch out for. The other thing I just want to talk about briefly before we get into talking about what's happening with the UTAW and our campaigns at some of these big tech companies, is Brazil versus X, formerly known as Twitter. So for those of you who don't know, Brazil, the whole country, has implemented a federal law that blocks the platform X, formerly known as Twitter, and they're really serious about it. They've even implemented into their legislation that if you get caught circumventing this block, you'll be fined like $8,000 a day, the equivalent of $8,000 a day. So they're really, really serious about it. And I think it's an interesting bit of news and industry stuff for us, because X is such a marquee social media platform, tech company. We've done some organising in X. We saw as soon as Musk took over Twitter, we heard from our members their first-hand experience of his management style. He ranked developers at Twitter based on how many lines of code they wrote, which is a really dumb way of doing that, because actually it's not a good way of measuring how good a developer is. Good developer arguably reduce and rationalize code. But what we're seeing here is the state is actually, because Musk essentially doxed several Brazilian citizens, and the state has sort of taken steps, and it shows. I don't know. For me, it just shows that he's not a Marvel character. States can stand up to these big multinational, seemingly unaccountable companies and make them accountable, and it's going to change what the internet looks like. I think we're starting to see the decay at the end of.
Yeah, it's also really important from a regulatory point of view. There's a Greek guy, Yanis Varoufakis, who wrote a whole book about techno-feudalism, which not sure I buy into, but there's this whole idea of like what does happen when one person controls every small little aspect of this giant platform that everybody relies on for their news, for speaking to each other and stuff like that. That really does need to be regulated much more strongly, if not be in government control completely.
Yeah, certainly if those platforms become a monopoly. I think if we look at, say maybe the biggest 3 platforms, if you exclude LinkedIn, which is obviously a professional platform, but the only one that's actually growing out of interest.
Really?
It is, yeah, definitely. Meta, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, those are kind of your big 3, and they're controlled by 2 people, basically, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and they do have editorial control over what is popular on, they promote their own. Musk famously promotes his own tweets. He bought a multi-billion-dollar platform just to have followers, and we know that Mark Zuckerberg deliberately shadow bans and masks content talking about topics that he'd rather not see, particularly Palestine.
I don't think that's fair to Elon Musk. I think we have to remember that he tried to pull out of buying Twitter, and then the government forced him because of financial rules, because he promised essentially.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, I think he did try and change his mind, but it was a bit too little, too late.
Too much too late.
Too much too late. Even that kind of money, he's lost a huge amount. Anyway, we'll move on to some companies that aren't Twitter or Facebook, but they're still household names that everyone should recognise watching the show. I'm going to ask, we've got Iran's leading some of these organising campaigns, closely working with our members on the ground. First one I want to talk about is Apple Retail in particular. We're fighting for recognition almost on a store-by-store basis. Tell us a bit about how that kind of started.
Well, that started because members at Apple came to us and said, we want to get organized. We don't like the way that the way that things are headed, and of course we said we'd help them because that's what we do. And it's Apple's an interesting one because I don't know if you've ever been to an Apple store, but it's very sleek, it's very shiny, and the working culture inside it is very unique. I don't want to use the word culty, but there's
regimented.
Regimented, yeah. I didn't say culty, but there's very much a lot of Apple speak, a lot of jargon that's only in Apple, and that can lead to, if you're being managed in the same way that you'd expect any corporate management to happen, but actually it's with a smile on your face, and it's the classic we're family, but they don't use the word family. It's just very much touchy-feely, but you're still getting shafted, and it's still extremely unpleasant for workers. And as soon as that
performance as well, I think anyone who's been into an Apple store feels like they're walking into a very tightly curated. It feels more like going to a museum for me. Obviously, as a trade unionist going to Apple stores talking to members, Apple Retail really don't like that. Yeah. So, but my experience as someone who's trying to get in out of the rain in Covent Garden maybe one day, it does feel like walking into a museum. And the staff, you feel like they're being tightly monitored.
Oh yeah, very much so. They really don't like us going in and talk to people. I've been kicked out of several London ones. But I mean, the biggest issues that people are facing there right now are just Apple doesn't do redundancies. Yeah. We're at the time of redundancies across the board, and Apple's very, very proud. I don't know if it's because of its shareholders or what, that they don't do redundancies, except that they are. First of all, they just did one in Spain, big one. But the way that this is all speculation, hypothesis based on the patterns of corporate management that we're seeing, is that they are finding any reason to get rid of people, and then they don't backfill positions. So it's a longer process than the redundancy, but it does. With Apple retail, they probably got some of the longest tenures out of retail. Totally. Like you'll have people in Apple stores who've been working there for like 16, 17 years.
They buy it. They feed off that loyalty as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Apple always pays whatever is the higher end of the pay range for retail. Apple pays the higher range, and that also stops people from complaining, because how can you complain? You get paid if you go into a mobile phone store, you get paid way less, which is only half true, because you'll also be making way more commission. You don't make commission at Apple.
But I mean, people in Apple stores fix laptops and do.
Yeah, they've got expertise, not just the people in the Genius Bar that fix stuff, but also the specialists or like the shop floor workers. They know their stuff, and they've got to be on top of all of the new devices that are coming in. But yeah, essentially Apple's finding any reason to get rid of people. Some of it's extremely spurious, and a lot of disability discrimination. We've got more and more cases going to tribunal against Apple for disability discrimination when people are neurodivergent, when people have other disabilities where
we won our first case.
We won our first case as well. That wasn't disability related. That was straight up union busting.
Yeah. And one of the things, before we move on to Google, which is our next company we want to talk about, there's a bit of a pattern here. In UTAW, we've had to cotton on to really quickly is international collaboration with other unions and organised workers. We obviously, the tech sector, like a lot of things, a lot of the companies are US based. So we obviously, and our guest later in the show is calling in from California. We'll talk about that more. But we watch American companies to see what they do, how they treat their workers. We also watch those American companies to see what they do in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, to see how they treat their workers, because we have to be alive to that, because it's coming here next. So Apple's a really good example of where, even before they came to the unions, they formed Apple Together, I think, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah. So that's an international Discord channel for workers who want to unionize at Apple. So it's got people from all over the world in Apple, both from the corporate tech development side and from the stores.
Yeah, and that's huge. I mean, that's a really important bit of UTAW's work is building those links. That's something we're looking to grow in the future. Google's the next company. So we've got obviously everyone has heard of Google. They've got a fairly significant presence in the UK. Their head office is the King's Cross office, I think, isn't it? Yeah, they've got some other offices, but the King's Cross one is their main one. We're in a recognition campaign jointly with Unite, and it's been a slow burner, but it's been a campaign that's been led by Google employees for quite a long time. Like, tell us about those sort of top issues that you might not expect to hear from.
Well, I mean, we've had Googlers in the union from even almost before the union branch was formed. But
some of the founding members were Google members. Yeah.
But I think like the real influx and the real the agitation came when Google started doing redundancies, and I don't know, not a lot of people might remember this, but the wave of redundancies in tech started because the Google board, or the board of investors of Google, I forget the term for it, essentially wrote a letter to Google's executives saying, your employees are paid too much, your workforce is too big, and you need to start making cuts. And that triggered Google
to hedge fund, wasn't it?
It was one guy from a hedge fund.
Just gave them management advice.
So they did redundancies, and that's the law of capitalism. When one company does something to get ahead, everybody else has to do it, or they won't compete. So we had just loads of Googlers coming in. Alphabet Workers Union, which is our sister union in the US, that just focuses on Alphabet, the parent company that owns Google and its subsidiaries, who are unionizing there. And we work together quite closely to get a response going and to get workers the tools they need to sort of start organizing there.
And I think, we've definitely taken a lead again from the US. We look at these companies and we try and learn from organisation efforts in the States and replicate it here. In many ways, we've actually got a bit of an easier task, because it's so difficult to unionise in the States. So many anti-labour laws that are on the books. We're not at that place. The thing we move on to now, which is important to both of us, is no tech for apartheid. I think we've got a little video about that might talk about that from one of our members.
I'm here today because I believe Google should drop Project Nimbus and stop supporting Israeli apartheid.
I'm a tech worker. I care about the situation going on in Palestine, and Google are deeply involved in something called Project Nimbus, which is basically providing cloud computing services to the IDF, to the Israeli military.
The Israeli military has admitted its forces violated protocol by strapping a wounded Palestinian man to a jeep.
Moments like these are incredibly important. We need to show that we can come out here in full force, stating what we believe in and making a gesture to Google to do the right thing.
I think protesting around Gaza and calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire is really, really the most important thing that we do today.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
So hopefully that video gave viewers a bit of insight into some of the activist work that we're doing that's so closely linked with trade union work. I think one of the conversations we often have with people around the union, this union, outside the union, is that for tech workers, Palestine, the ongoing genocide in Palestine, is an industrial issue for us, because so much of it is powered by big tech companies. Like, it's enabled by these. The Project Nimbus was mentioned there in that video. So much of it is enabled by technologies sold by these big tech companies, Amazon and Google in this particular instance, to the Israeli entity and their military, and they use it, facial recognition to target civilians, let alone the kind of the physical hardware that goes into these things, and then just some basic cloud computing. Like, it really, tech work somewhere is powering the apartheid and the genocide. So it really is an industrial issue for us. It's something that our members are very keen on organising in, and it shows the importance. People that remember the importance of trade union struggle with South African apartheid, and ultimately that fell because of, it became economically unviable because of things like the boycott and divestment movement that is being, used against Israel as well. But it succeeded because of trade union support. And I think, it's for you, it's conversations I know you have a lot with NOTA members. It brings them to the trade union movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing we found when we were approached by people who weren't yet members, but who saw that the union had a strong position on Palestinian solidarity, and they wanted to organize No Tech for Apartheid in the UK. It already existed in the US, and they joined the union. We ran them through organizing trainings. We came up with a plan. We coordinated closely with the US campaign, and they got going. We saw a lot of people. First of all, it's important in its own right, like you say. Yeah. But there's also a benefit to the wider union and the wider recognition effort in Google, because people joined, and people joined the union through the No Tech for Apartheid, who, when I spoke to them, never even knew that there was unionization happening in Google. Google is a huge corporation, and unfortunately, the union activists' reach is not what it should be yet. So having a variety of different campaigns in the workplace that draw on different people's interests or emotions, things that people really care about. You pull in different demographics, and that's how you build alliances between different sets of workers in the workplace.
They're all workers' issues,
Exactly.
And I think one of the things we've learned in the sort of 3 or 4 years that UTAW has been around is that some of our strongest activists, some of our fastest growing campaigns have come from bases where they are working on climate justice, social justice, or indeed anti-genocide, not wanting their work to go to be supporting genocide and apartheid. The other interesting thing, we've done work, we mentioned it's King's Cross. We built quite practical alliances with local union branches there, and had a guest speaker. Last time we went and did a protest. Who was that?
So, we had Jeremy Corbyn, who, famously is a supporter of the Palestinian cause. We also had Andrew Feinstein, I think his name is, who was running against Keir Starmer in that constituency, who is a Jewish South African member of the. He was a comrade of Nelson Mandela's. Those alliances are really, really important. So we've got a good working relationship now with the Camden Council Unison branch, who are very well organized. It's very good, and they came out. They're right next door to Google's headquarters, so they came out for a protest that we did.
And we're also working, very closely with Unite as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, it's a joint recognition campaign. Behind the scenes, it's working very closely. So that's nice to work with another union on that. So moving on to TikTok, we'll talk about that briefly, and then we'll talk about our recognition ballot success, and then we've got a special guest that we'll bring in. So, if you tell us a little bit about TikTok. So TikTok is another brand, company that everyone's heard of. And it's probably been one of our fastest growing campaigns. Really started sort of end of last year, where we got approached. Tell us who at TikTok approached us and why.
So someone from the content moderation division of TikTok approached us saying that, citing a number of problems, the biggest one there for them at the time was performance review. Actually, that's a big one twice a year because they've got them twice a year, and wanting to organize. So again, we gave them the tools that they needed. We ran them through training. We talked about different strategies and different approaches to gaining union recognition, to changing policies towards something more beneficial to the workers. And they did really brilliant work sort of straight off the bat. Almost everyone who works in TikTok's content moderation division is a migrant worker. Lots of Spanish, Latin American people, but also people from Eastern Europe, from all over the world. And yeah, they got going. It's always slow going at first because one of the first things we do...
Unions are all new to them. Again,
unions are all new to them.
The theme that goes through all this, and we could do a whole show on, is wherever we're organising in tech, unions are brand new. No one has any experience. So we've got a lot of different battles to face when we're organising and having those conversations. The bit I want to talk about content moderation briefly and touch on, again, this sort of international angle. Content moderation is one of those things that probably a lot of people that don't use these platforms, we've talked about Instagram, we've talked about Twitter, we've talked about TikTok, all of the content you see on there is heavily moderated.
Oh yes.
Has to be heavily moderated, and there's so much work. It gets outsourced, a lot of it, sometimes to the third world. We've done work with the Kenyan Content Moderators Union.
Yep.
Yeah. Just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so that is the Kenyan Content Moderators Union, CMU, and they... Essentially what happens is when you flag a video on TikTok or a post on Facebook, it gets put into a tier of like, how bad is it? Is it like racism? Is it child abuse? Is it just something that you don't like the look of? And a lot of the content moderation ends up in European content moderation centers. And what turned out that TikTok or rather ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, and a few other companies were doing, was outsourcing it to African countries because A, labor is cheaper there, B, labor laws are worse there, so there's no protection from stress, from mental harm to mental health. So what ended up happening is there's people living in Dadaab, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in the world, I believe, in Kenya, working for something like $1 an hour, watching the absolute worst things that people are putting on the internet, like having to moderate something like 100 or 200 videos, and people got PTSD from it really badly. And a lot of them are migrant workers within Africa. So we've got people coming from South Africa and from Rwanda and other places on
hugely
work visits to Kenya.
And it's not an accident.
It's not an accident, no. They're much easier to exploit. So they started unionizing and they got crushed, but they sort of continued the effort from the outside, and we are supporting them on that. Yeah.
And again, it's tech work. I think hopefully we've maybe explained and expanded our kind of definition of tech work. All the different groups that we're talking about are all tech workers. It's a huge bit of the economy globally, huge bit of the economy in the UK, and hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight to some of our work and our members and our target audience. The last thing I want to talk about before we talk with our special guest is our first recognition ballot victory at Saab.
Yeah, Saab, which you might recognize from its engines that it makes. But our members there are in the public safety division, so they make, run, and maintain the software that, if you call 999, connects your call to the operator, to the ambulance, or to the fire engine, or to the police car. So it's all, connecting radio to mobile phone, to text, and all of that. It's a lot of like integrating different kinds of technologies, and they've had a few issues around transparency and around lack of inflationary pay rises and things like that they decided to unionize about. So that started about 1.5 years ago when they put in their request for recognition, and they've just won their ballot. Yeah, they're very pleased with themselves.
Huge,
as they should be.
Huge. Our first significant business unit, and we look forward to following that through and negotiating that agreement with the employer. But yeah, it's a milestone for us, and that's something we're proud to share about on our show. I'm just going to move to our special guest. So just to frame this a little bit, I've already mentioned one of the things we always keep an eye on as technologists and as trade unionists is what happens with these tech companies in America, because what they're doing if we look at Amazon, who we're going to talk about now, it's a great example. If you see an Amazon grocery store popping up in Seattle and news about that and AI, replacing workers, that in 1 or 2 years that's going to be in London. And sure enough, those things come to fruition. I think we always keep an eye on those companies to see what they're doing. And our special guest tonight will talk about something that I think will appeal and be of interest to all of our members across the constituencies, postal and telecoms and financial services and tech. So I'm delighted to introduce Adrienne Williams. She's a former educator, an Amazon delivery driver. She's seen firsthand the harm inflicted by technology on students and workers, and this moved her to begin her work as a labour organiser. Adrienne has worked to shut down Amazon warehouses, protect pregnant workers' rights, and hold Amazon accountable. She's a fellow at the Distributed AI Research Institute, who we're big fans of from the branch, and I'd like to hand over to Adrienne to introduce her most recent work, which again I think will be of interest to not only our tech members but anyone working in postal, and I know our telecoms members who are interested in things like surveillance on vans or dash cams. Like, this is a topic that you should be listening to as well. So Adrienne, hopefully you're on the end of the line.
Yeah. Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm not even sure where to start. So
tell us how.
I guess.
I gave you a very brief intro. Tell us how what sprung you into get into your line of research now, and what propels you to keep going.
Yeah, so I think I first started kind of paying attention to all this when I was a junior high teacher, and I didn't quite understand the difference between like regular public schools and then corporate charter schools. And I think in the UK, those are like corporate academies.
Yeah.
And so I worked for a CZI charter school, which is Mark Zuckerberg. And they created the online learning platform that they say is personalized learning. If you ever hear that word, just know it's a crock of BS. And so when I worked there, I started noticing some things with my kids. They would say, you're only supposed to have your kids online for 90 minutes a day, but my kids were online like 5 and 6 hours a day, and then expected to do 2 hours of online homework a night. And I was seeing both physical issues, back pain, neck pain, migraines, eyesight breaking down, and then emotional issues, just the agitation. I could watch my kids from the beginning of the year when they came in just like, happy to be at school. And then by the end of the year, the agitation of what that kind of school day was doing to them led to like more fights. It was more dangerous for teachers. Just kids just shutting down. I'm not doing this. I don't want to do it.
So a good example of technology kind of thoughtlessly deployed with the outcomes being made worse for everyone, except for maybe the people that own those companies.
Exactly. And I spoke with people from the corporate side. So they're doing the curriculum supposedly, and even that was mediocre. And I had one corporate employee say, yeah, this is just a front for data mining. So the education was secondary. And then the thing that really scared me the most was, so I only lasted there for about 2 years. And then I was like, I couldn't take it anymore. I felt like the weight of the whole school was on my back. And it was too much. What really scared me about that school was that they have this system where they say, like, we have mentors. So every teacher had a mentor group, and you were supposed to kind of guide your mentees and things like that. But you were also supposed to do these one-on-one check-ins at least once a week with your kids. Now, Priscilla Chan would say, mentors are just for socio-emotional learning, which is a big buzzword right now, but nobody seems to be able to explain what that really is. And we got zero training on it. And then the CEO at the time, Diane Tavener, who actually created Summit Public Schools, where I worked, says, no, mentors are for college readiness. But I had 7th and 8th graders. These are like kids between 12 and 13. 7th graders especially, 12-year-olds, they don't care about college. That's not where their mindset is.
Far away for them. Yeah.
Far away from that. So what I was checking in with my kids were talking about, eating disorders, self-harm, sexual abuse, parents getting deported, gang violence. I mean, things that were way above my pay grade. And it felt to me like a way of getting around hiring, you know, good qualified therapists and counselors that schools are supposed to have.
Yeah, sure.
The part that was scary to me is that as mentors, we were supposed to type in notes into our work issued computer about all of those check-ins. And that felt,
Bit invasive.
it just felt wrong to me. Yeah, it felt nasty. And so I didn't do it.
So you spurned from there to, and what did you do when you left there?
Well, dumb idea. I thought, oh, I'll go work for Amazon. It's a solo job and I'll figure out how to get, I'll get my head straight. And I just noticed the same problems. But I do want to make this point real quick that I don't think I was the only one who refused to write those notes.
Yeah,
and
sure.
so a year after I quit, they created this program called Along. And what Along does is that when you have those one-on-one meetings with your kids, you have to turn it on, and it audio and video records those sessions. And those are going straight to Meta engineers. They literally fired all the Summit employees from their corporate side. So all of that information that usually in the US is protected by HIPAA laws that say like your medical records have to be
There's
protected.
been some exception made. Yeah.
They found a loophole to get around it. And so all that really delicate student information is going to Meta.
No, I didn't know about any of this. I think it's another example of we need to, and I didn't know that Meta were running schools in the States. Like, that's another classic example of we need to see what's happening there and what they get away with and be vigilant that it doesn't happen here. Like, that's all stuff that you could well believe you start hearing about in a couple of years. Like, we're only a couple of policy changes away from that. That was really...
It's already happening.
Yeah.
Where you guys are at in terms of ed tech.
Yeah.
So they're very slippery.
Do you know what they were using that data for? Why were they mining all of that data?
So at the time, because I didn't understand very much of it, my thought was there was this big kind of back and forth about Meta wanting to create Instagram for kids. And in my head, I was like, well, where else are they going to get this kid's information but there? But that was just a guess. I don't know. But what I'm finding out now is that all of this stuff is just being used to train large language models and AI systems. And so it's basically free labor. They could pay somebody to train their AI. They could pay writers to take their work. They could pay artists to take their work. They don't want to. And so a way of getting access to free data through the schools, especially on kids.
I heard this about games, like a lot of children's games that are out there are collecting like what children respond to and their interests, and it helps build it into essentially marketing and advertising stuff.
And I guess what we know about things like ChatGPT is that it's mostly trained on the internet, but it's big, but there's only so much of the internet. But then they're getting all of these real life interactions and examples that they wouldn't necessarily be seeing even if these kids did have their own Instagram. So it's like a whole new source of information.
The way that technology infiltrates our lives and we don't even think about it is huge, and maybe a whole separate series of different UTAW-based shows. But I didn't know any of that about your background, Adrian. Actually, it's really interesting. But the Amazon. So you left there and you thought, right, okay, I know a much easier job. Let's go be an Amazon delivery driver. And how did that?
Yeah, because my degree's in graphic design. So like how I got here and how I got here doing what I'm doing kind of blows my mind too. But when I started at Amazon, it was right before the pandemic and almost immediately. So I was November 2019 that I started. And almost immediately I started noticing the same type of things like refusal to follow health and safety laws, actual laws, intense surveillance. So at the time, I quit a month before they put those cameras in, but they still had things for drivers like the Mentor app.
Is that what you're talking about?
So it's cameras that face you inside the van, but the slipperiest thing I think are the ones outside the van, because this goes back to like forced labor.
Yeah,
and
this is the bit that I don't think is happening here yet, but I could definitely see either Amazon implementing it or Royal Mail or one of the other, whoever's got vans. We've had, some surveillance questions with our telecoms workers and people that drive British Telecom vans. Talk a little bit more about this unwaged labour that Amazon are kind of operating in a grey area to exploit.
Yeah. So I like to call them zombie trainers because they have no idea that they're training AI. They have no idea what the effects it's going to have on society. And they're not getting paid for it. So with the Amazon bans, those cameras are for a third-party company called Netrodyne. And they're on the inside, but they're also on the outside of the van. And so there is this technology that's called high-definition 3D maps. And really what that is just getting every inch and corner of a city, state, country, whatever. And whoever can get that to work properly, who can really get all of that road data, will essentially have cornered the market on driverless car technology. And so the Netrodyne has said, they say in interviews, it's like, oh, well, we're just about fleet safety. But then when you look at interviews from the co-founder, he talks a lot about driverless car technology and how Netrodyne has gathered the most road data. I know in the US, I'm assuming, well, your drivers don't use.
We don't really have Amazon drivers as such. What we have is people who rent out a van from a subcontractor and drive it around, but it doesn't have cameras or anything on it.
But they're Amazon branded vans. Yeah,
there are.
Yeah, okay. There's Amazon branded vans. They're kind of operated one step away from Amazon directly. But that wouldn't stop them selling a contract to someone like Netrodyne, like you say, and saying, right, well, you can because they're essentially they're on the road 12 hours a day. No one's on the road more than Amazon,
So are they trying to compete with Google Street View, or is that a different kind of 3D mapping?
It's for the autonomous driving. So
no, I get that.
It's for
Street View gives you a lot of information on what's on the road already. No.
So what's unique about the Amazon bans is that what it gives them is multiple instances of data from a road. So you might have a month's worth of data from one street. And that's helpful in training autonomous vehicles because then they understand how to maneuver on those roads better. Netrodyne has gathered like over 500 million, miles of road data. And so now you have companies like Hyundai, I'm sure there's others, I just haven't found them, who are partnering with Netrodyne to help them build driverless car technology for their companies. And they've admitted that hey, car companies can't afford to pay enough surveyors to equip enough cars on the road to create our own, data for these cars. But we can partner with Netrodyne, and then we can get it for free. And so they're admitting it's a job. They're admitting it needs to be paid.
But they're piggybacking off the unwaged labor of Amazon drivers who are out there doing their normal job, but they're not getting paid for their second job, which is even more lucrative. And I think
more lucrative.
One of the things that I really wanted Adrienne to come on the show and to talk about for our viewers is that is something that we're going to see here. No two ways about it. And it's only a question of which company is going to bring it in. Is Amazon going to do the same thing here? Because there's huge investment. The UK, even more than other places in Europe, there's a huge investment in autonomous vehicles. There's some of the big tech unicorn billion-dollar companies are based in the UK that do this kind of mapping and autonomous driving. So it's only a matter of time before you stop seeing, occasionally you drive past a car with loads of cameras on it. It's going to be put on maybe your van, So it's something we want to keep an eye on here, but it's already happening in the States. So it's only a matter of time. Just like Amazon Grocery, that happened in the States, then it was in London. And I think it's only a matter of time before it comes in. Has there been much? What's the responses been from sort of organised labour in the States about this?
Organized labor in the States. I feel like it's kind of a nightmare. There are a lot of people trying really hard to do good work and take care of people. I feel like the laws that are there's already a ton of laws on the books that say you can't, intimidate organizers, that you can't target organizers, that you can't union bust. Our issue isn't so much laws, it's that our country and our politicians and our government don't enforce the laws on big companies. And so you're kind of at a loss. organized unions don't seem all that interested in this aspect of it. It feels to me, especially around Amazon, that it's this big like King Kong banging your chest thing that like, I'm going to be the one to organize Amazon. I'm going to be the one to take it down. And that no one person ever does any of this alone. And so I feel like there's kind of a missed opportunity to really engage with workers, engage with drivers, because they're using warehouse workers to train their AI also. And there's harm there for not just the workers in the warehouse, but then for these other third-party workers. And there may be other countries, but I know out of India, who are literally forced to sit and stare at what the workers in the warehouse are doing to figure out,
Well,
to mark things that are happening.
It wasn't AI, it was Indian workers. So the background to this is that Amazon grocery stores, that one of their big selling points was like, we don't need people working in the shop. AI would tell us what you put in your basket. Well, what actually it was is Indian workers looking at what's in your basket and manually inputting it. So it was a big con. But this is, again, a lot of the stuff you see marketed as AI, it's just that marketing is actually workers somewhere being exploited, normally in the global south. And this is more of that.
Yeah, and the crazy part is, well, two things. One, AI is people. Like every aspect of it is people, whether it's the content moderation or the data labeling or literally just staring at a screen to mark things and check things. There's been reports out of India that the workers are like, my eyes have been ruined because even blinking might get me in trouble and get me fired because I can't miss a second. So there's just this like overwhelming exploitation that says your health, your body, your mental, stability, none of that matters. Just make our product look like we have told the public it's gonna look. Shoot, and I forgot my other point. What?
I was talking about one of the things I was going to say that you kind of alluded to was it sounds like the states, a lot of different unions need to work together, and I think it's going to be similar here. If we're to take on companies like Amazon, obviously we've had famously GMB, comrades at the GMB organise and only just miss out on a recognition ballot at the Coventry
warehouse.
Coventry warehouse fulfillment centre. Sorry, and it's going to need a coordinated effort here between lots of different unions. Obviously, tech sector. We've got a lot of members in Amazon Web Services, which is a huge, very profitable bit of Amazon, and that's obviously delivery drivers and stuff as well. And it sounds like that's what no one's working together enough to combat, so nothing's happening.
No, not really. I mean, Teamsters, which is one of the oldest unions in the US, has actually made a really big move forward like a couple weeks ago, where they had sued Amazon and won a ruling that said that Amazon now has to be seen as co-owner, co-boss to the drivers. And so I'm hoping that that's, and I'm sure there's gonna be a ton of appeals and Lord knows when that'll go into effect. But if that can stick, there's a lot of leeway then to push for better, more accountability, better work conditions, things like that. And the beauty of that is that, at least in the US, wherever Amazon goes, they're setting the precedent for every other group in their industry. And back to the charter schools, that Zuckerberg school that I work for is doing the same for online learning and ed tech products. They're being seen as the gold standard. And so is Amazon, seen as like the gold standard of how we want to operate.
What they can get away with as well. I think that's the thing. I think one of the bits, like the really perfidious bits about Amazon, is that if we're, as a trade union movement and all our members watching this, if we're not increasingly vigilant to all the different ways they exploit labor, both here and abroad, the global South, America, we're going to be slinging our hook outside fulfillment centers for a day's work. Like that's the future Amazon has mapped out for us. And I think this is exactly why I brought Adrienne on the show. Like, I really wanted to highlight this is a global issue that we need to work together on. And if we don't, not only is possibly what I described happening, the increasing power of Amazon, but all those companies that until now have maybe been a bit more, by the book, they're going to look at Amazon going, why are we operating legally if Amazon continued to get away with it? And I'm not, it could be tax, where they pay their tax, how much of their profits they pay tax on. It could be how they treat their workers. They're going to look at that, where Amazon are growing and creating this monopoly, we're going to do the same, and therefore it affects everyone. So that hopefully, just drawing to a close this show today, like again, that the point of it has really been for us to try and draw in some of the issues that are perhaps seen as quite techie, not the ones we're talking about now, but actually they affect everyone, including the example about supposed ed tech, revolutionizing schools and education, but actually it's just data gathering to exploit.
That's all it is.
Exploit our kids, exactly.
And Amazon has their hand in that too. Jeff Bezos literally has Bezos Academy, Montessori schools. Like, who in the hell is letting their baby go to a Bezos Academy? But it's here.
But it's there. Well, again, something else we need to watch out for.
I mean, we've got those here, and the NEU is the National Education Union has been organizing stuff in those academies, but also I think lobbying against the academies as a thing that exists, because it shouldn't.
No, it shouldn't. Again, another example of where we need to work with our union brothers and sisters across all different unions to try and fight this stuff. Adrienne, we've run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, talking about your work and your really interesting background. Really appreciate you taking time. I know it's early in the morning in California. We thank you for dialing into the CW show, and hopefully we can get you on again, and we'll talk about some other work that the Distributed AI Research Institute are doing as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And can I just say real quick, a little push. I heard you guys talking about data workers.
Yeah.
There is a wonderful project that just came out at DARE called the Data Workers Inquiry, where the work was done by those workers. And they were paid for their articles, their essays, any work they put out, and it was highlighting the same stuff I heard you guys talking about earlier. So I would say that's something to check out for people.
I think our members at TikTok went there because we've advertised it to the members there.
Also, some of the people taking part in the Data Workers Inquiry were the Kenyan Content Moderators Union, who we talked about just before we started the interview, who we work with and support as well. So definitely something we want to support. Really interesting project to go check out if you're into that stuff, and we want to get involved in the future as well. Adrienne, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
And dialing in from California. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. So that about does it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in to CW Live. As always, we really appreciate your time and you being here and supporting us. If there's any questions you would like answered in future episodes, something or someone you'd like to see on the show, or perhaps you wanted to share your thoughts or comments on things so far, please comment on this or send us an email at info@cw.org. We'll see you again next week. It'll be someone else, but until then, stick with the union.